Many flag grade officers certainly understand the consequences that you just described in a rather hair-raising way. Why is it that while there are some generals speaking out in Italy, in France, in Germany, warning that we are pursuing a course that could lead to nuclear war, why are there not such voices from flag grade officers saying what you're saying here today? Retired, perhaps.
You know, there's been a tremendous deterioration in the quality of flag officers going back to perhaps, you know, after the time, maybe, well, certainly the 90s. We had very, very fine flag officers during the time I was on active duty. I left in 94, just superior quality people. But what happened is subsequently we had President Clinton take over. Later we had Obama. We've got Biden now, and they apply a very strict political screen to their military officers. And we now have yes men. These are not people whose principal devotion is to the United States and its people. Their principal devotion is to their careers and their ability to network with other military officers upon retirement. There's a very strong network that can place military generals into think tanks where they promote war, into organizations like Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and all of these defense operations, where they can get on boards and things like that. And so there's quite a personal price that you pay for saying, hey, stop, you know, war is not in the interests of the American people. If we had a better quality of individual, we would have people with the courage who would say, I don't care what it costs me personally. But it is very difficult to get into the senior ranks if you are an individual guided by principle and patriotism and devotion to the people of this nation. That's just not how it works. And at some point, we need a president who will go in and shake the tree and bring a lot of these people falling down from it, because they're dangerous. They're very dangerous to America.
Helga Zepp-LaRouche and the Schiller Institute have a petition, and we held a conference on April 9th on the same theme, being that the only way to really stop this descent into hell and into potential nuclear holocaust is for a new Peace of Westphalia. In this case, an international conference to secure a new security architecture and a new development architecture, the right to development for all countries. And like the Peace of Westphalia, one in which all sides sit down together, recognize their interests, their sovereign interests, as including the sovereign interests of the others, and forgiving all past crimes. Anything short of that is going to keep this division of the world into warring blocs. Just like I asked what's keeping the generals from speaking out, why and what will it take to get Americans to recognize that we can and must sit down with Russians and with Chinese and with all other nations and establish a true, a just world based on the dignity of man and the right to development and security?
I think, unfortunately, there's going to have to be enormous pain drive that, just as there was with the Peace of Westphalia. A nuclear war would do it. An economic cataclysm of unprecedented proportions resulting from the unbridled printing of money that we've engaged in over the last 20 years. There are things that could bring it about. But at this point, the media has been so totally censored and so biased that the American people really don't have a perception of the need for anything of that sort. It's going to be difficult. You know, here's something that's interesting that has happened. Here in this country, you would think the entire world is against Russia. It's not. In fact, there are major countries of the world that lean towards Russia in this war, starting with China, but then Brazil. You've got South Africa, Saudi Arabia, a wide array of countries, tremendous India is tremendously supportive of Russia. And so the idea that somehow we have this enormously just cause, it doesn't strike a great deal of the world that it is just. And much of the world does not accept the latest propaganda about war crimes. This thing about Bucha, that's probably the most prominent of all the war crimes discussions. And what was Bucha? There was a film taken of a vehicle driving down the road in Bucha, which had been recaptured from the Russians. And every 100 feet or so, there was some person with his hands zip tied behind his back, and he'd been killed. This was discovered, it was not announced until 4 days after the Ukrainians had retaken Bucha. Now, we knew almost nothing about it. We actually didn't even have proof that people had been killed, but assuming they had, we didn't know where they had been killed. We did not know who they were. We did not know who killed them. We did not know why they were killed. No one could provide an adequate motive for the Russians to have killed them. The Russians held Bucha for a month. If they were going to kill them, why didn't they kill them during that month? And if you were going to slaughter a bunch of people, wouldn't they all be in one place, and wouldn't you gun them all down there? Why would they be distributed along a roadside, you know, a mile along the way? It makes no sense. What we do know is that 4 days after, the mayor of Bucha joyously announced that the city was liberated. 4 days after, the Ukrainian army had moved in, and their special, their propaganda arm of the Ukrainian military were there. All of a sudden, there were these dead people on the road. How come they weren't there when the Russians were there? How come they only appeared after the Russians were gone? If I were looking at that as simply a standard criminal case, and I was talking to Criminal Investigation Division or the FBI or military police or something, I'd say, okay, the first thing, let's take a look at the Ukrainians. My guess would be, and you start with a hunch when you're investigating a crime. My hunch is that the Ukrainians killed off these people after they moved in and after they looked around and said, okay, who was friendly towards the Russian troops while the Russians were here? we're gonna execute them. That would be my guess, because I don't see any motive for the Russians to have just sort of killed a few people on their way out of town. So you have and nobody questions these because the corporate media is so monolithic. We know for a fact from the mouth of the head of a Ukrainian hospital, the guy who ran the hospital, he boasted that he had given strict orders to all of his doctors that when wounded Russian POWs, when casualties were brought in, they were to be castrated. Now, this is a horrific war crime admitted from the mouth of the hospital administrator, and the Ukrainian government said, we'll look into that, like it's no big thing. I can't think of a more horrific war crime ever. Where did you hear about it? On ABC and MSNBC and CNN and Fox News? Not a whisper. And yet the proof is undeniable. We had another clip where there was a POW gathering point where the Ukrainians would bring POWs to a central point for processing. And this is about a 7-minute video, and the Ukrainian soldiers simply gunned them all down. And they had probably 30 of these wounded Russian soldiers laying on the ground, some of them clearly dying from their wounds. Some of them, they put plastic bags over their head. Now, these are guys who are laying there, sometimes fatally wounded, with their hands zip tied behind their backs, and they've got plastic bags over their heads so that making it difficult to breathe. And because they can't raise their hands, they can't take the bags off so that they can breathe. And then at the end of the video, the Ukrainians bring in a van, and there are 3 unwounded Russian POWs, and without the slightest thought or hesitation, as the 3 come off and their hands are bound behind their backs, they gun down 2 of them right on camera, and they fall over, and the 3rd one gets on his knees and begs that they won't hurt him, and then they gun him down. And these are crimes, and these were not refuted by the Russian or by the Ukrainian government, but you'd never even know that they occurred. So far, I will tell you that the only proven, I'm not saying that there aren't war crimes happening on both sides. I'm just telling you the only ones where I have seen fairly irrefutable proof of war crimes have been on the Ukrainian side. Now, often you hear it said, well, the Russians have, they've destroyed this or destroyed that. Well, I got to tell you, you go back to the wars that we fought when we invaded Iraq, the shock and awe. We destroyed virtually everything in Iraq, everything of significance. We bombed military and civilian targets without much discrimination. The coalition flew 100,000 sorties in 42 days. You compare that to the Russians, who have only flown 8,000 sorties in about the same period of time. 100,000 American bombs versus 8,000, not bombs, but sorties of bombs. 100,000 versus 8,000 in about the same time. And I think the Russians have tended to be more selective Whereas we went out, the shock and awe, the philosophy of shock and awe is that you destroy everything that is needed to sustain human life and for a city to function. You knock out the water supply, the electrical supply, the heat, the oil, the gasoline, so that you knock out all of the major bridges, and then you just continue and you just destroy everything. So it's really ironic that, and keep in mind, Iraq is a relatively small country. Ukraine is a huge country. 100,000 sorties in 42 days, 8,000 sorties in about the same time. A tremendous difference in violence between what we did in Iraq and what they have done in Ukraine. So there's simply no credibility when you actually get down to the facts and you look at the way that the war has been conducted.
Well, Senator Black, Colonel Black, I think the way you have described the horror that's already taking place, and considering that we can't wait for a nuclear war to provoke a new Peace of Westphalia, and I would suggest that what you've described is already horrific enough. And when combined with the hyperinflationary breakdown now sweeping the Western world, which everybody is being affected, we believe that we have to take that as the adequate horror and recognition of a descent into a dark age to motivate citizens in Europe and the United States. And we are finding that there is a waking up of people who have not wanted to look at their responsibility to the human race as a whole in the past, who now are forced to consider that, which is the basis on which we've called for this, in this petition, for an international conference of all nations with the US, Russia, China, India, and so forth, sitting down to end this horror, but to also bring about a true peace for mankind and an era of peace through development. And we thank you for giving this breath of ugly truth to a population which needs to hear it. And if you have any final thoughts, I ask you to give your final greetings.
I'll just add one thing, and I thank the Schiller Institute for the tremendous effort that you've made towards achieving world peace. It is one of the most important efforts ever made, and I certainly applaud that. You know, if you look at Russia, the Russian troops that went into battle in Ukraine, for the most part, had never experienced combat. This is a peacetime army. Russia doesn't fight overseas wars. Syria is the only significant overseas engagement that they have had. You compare that with the United States, where, literally speaking, if a soldier retires today after a 30-year career in the military, he will not have served a single day when the United States was at peace. Kind of an amazing thing. And you contrast that with the Russian military, where, with few exceptions, the country has been at peace. So we really need to start thinking about peace and about the limits of warfare, and this idea that somehow we need this zero-sum game where we take from you and that enhances us. we're in a world where everyone can gain and prosper by peace. And but I'm concerned that the hyperinflation may be the wake-up call that that jolts the world into a recognition that we must have a new paradigm for the future. And I think the Peace of Westphalia at that point might become a possibility. So I thank you again for the opportunity to be here. And, you know, there's always hope, and I think there'll be good things in the future with the blessings of God.
And thank you very much from Schiller Institute, the LaRouche Organization, and EIR. We'll get this posted as quickly as we possibly can because it's going to have a tremendous impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much.